Hi everyone, it's Colleen, and this is Tuesday, May 24th, 2016, and this is Haggie Reads for You on Haggie Shack Radio at haggieshack.com, simulcasting to Wolf Spirit Radio. Today I want to pick up where I left off last week with The Children of the Law of One, The Lost Teachings of Atlantis by John Peniel. Start by contemplating your motives for giving or loving. In other words, when you are giving, what do you personally stand to lose or gain from that giving? Is there a selfish motive involved at all? If so, it contaminates any real unselfish giving and love that may have been there also. When you are loving, what will you be getting back from the one you love? For instance, if you give a gift to your lover, don't you expect to get gratitude and extra affection? Selfish motives are behind giving or loving in what we would call a normal relationship. Often, even when people give to their lover, there is a subtle motive to get something back. Because when you give to your lover, feeding their wants and desires, they like it. They get off on it, as you put it. Then, they like you because you're giving them the feelings or the things that they want. And we know that. Thus, you get a response from them that gets you off. That's ideally how it works in a normal relationship, but it's often not the case. There is also an expectation of reciprocation, which is ultimately never met. But I didn't have any selfish motivation when I offered to let my girlfriend go do that. You thought you didn't, but you had a selfish motive also. No? What? You didn't think that if you did that, she would let you do the same? Well, yes, it would have been an assumption, but I didn't do it because of that. I really wanted to live true love and give love, and I wanted her to be happy. I see in your eyes that you speak the truth, son. You have already learned the lesson of motivation and giving in that way, but you haven't transcended your selfishness yet, and therein was the problem. Yes? And you have much to go through before you will, I'm afraid. I hope not. I had no idea the suffering I would have to endure before I transcended my selfishness regarding women. Finally, become truly unselfishly loving and find true love. But that is a subject for later in the book. Our conversation went on. True love. Is there such a thing as true love? Do you mean in the sense of a relationship? He didn't give me time to answer. No matter. In either case, the answer is the same. What I would call true love is simply unselfish love. Unselfish love radiates to all without exception, so powerfully that it transcends your separate self and is God's love flowing through you to others. You become the vessel that is channeling the universal spirit, while also being the universal spirit. It gives to all who would receive. It is like a sun that gives warmth, light, and love to all, in all directions, simultaneously. If your love is not one that gives to all and loves all, then it is a selfishly based love. If you experience jealousy or possessiveness, then it is a selfishly based love. Not true love, not pure love, not unselfish love. then virtually no one truly loves or experiences receiving true love. Unfortunately, this is true. There are few situations in which most people experience giving pure, unselfish love, and the unselfish joy that comes from giving it. Yet it does happen in certain ways from time to time. Mothers have the greatest opportunity for this because of the very nature of their relationship with their children. Mothers cannot expect to get something in return or be reciprocally loved by their young children as they might expect in a normal relationship. Those who do expect gratitude from a young child are going to experience disappointment, because children have not usually developed even the artificial showing of such appreciation at their young age. Most mothers will find joy just knowing that they have done something good for their child, or that their child is happy. Some parents, both mothers and fathers, have experienced the feeling of joy of giving unselfishly when they give their child a gift that is from Santa Claus rather than from Mom or Dad, thus not getting credit for the gift. Also, most mothers would be willing to die for their children. Part of that is genetics of the human animal, but another part is unselfish love. A mother is generally happy rather than jealous when their grown child finds a mate and a pleasurable relationship. There are exceptions to this, of course. One such exception, which can result in strong feelings of jealousy and dislike toward the grown child's mate, is when there is a karma involving past relationship ties between a mother and a child. If the mother in a past life disliked, liked, or was romantically involved with a person who is now her child, there can be problems. Or, if the mother disliked or was jealous of the child's new mate in a past life, there will be discord. So there is no reciprocation of love when you love unselfishly? That's not what I said. There can be, but there doesn't need to be. If you feel a need for reciprocation, you aren't purely loving unselfishly. Being giving, unselfishly loving, warms the heart and is beneficial to the giver and the one who is being given to. Unselfish love is its own reward. The universal spirit is love. We are like faucets, and the universal spirit is like water. When you open up and let the water flow to all, you are constantly being filled with the water as it passes through. But if you close the faucet off because you mainly desire to keep the water for yourself, it doesn't flow through you, and you are left empty, which is what most people do. Yes, and the people who are thus empty because they don't outflow their love then start looking in different directions for something to fill them up. If a relationship diversion won't do it for them, if they are not loving and getting love from their relationships, what always eventually happens, they do other things. Even if they stay together with someone, they must look for diversions to fill the emptiness of the lack of love and God in their hearts and lives. Desperately, they think, constantly keeping the brain busy so they won't be aware of their emptiness. They pursue selfish pleasures and amusements of all kinds. They go from diversion to diversion. Food, games, clothing, movies, TV, sports, parties, social clubs, hobbies, lovers, shopping, cars, candy, you name it. But there is never any peace, and never any real or lasting satisfaction, only a temporary fix. And like a drug addict who needs a fix, the more it gets, the more it needs or wants. But the pleasure never lasts, and the feeling is never the same as the joy you get from giving. And ultimately, the connection to the universal spirit that is made through giving. They're left with that hollowness again, and the need to find some other distraction. They are really looking for love, looking to replace love, and doing everything but what they really need to do to find it. Give it. Oh, I get it now, that you put it in that way, he smiled wryly. What do you mean? I said as he shook his head and walked off. I was confused at why he did that at the time, but later, when I had become more spiritually mature, I realized it was because the tone of my statement reflected my huge ego, and that I wasn't listening well enough. So I just stood there for a moment, a little stunned, wondering why Zayn was just walking off like that in the middle of a conversation. He walked fast, too. He was already halfway down the path back towards the monastery. If I hadn't run after him, he'd have already been inside and gone somewhere before I even got to the gate. Father! Father! Wait! He just kept walking. When I finally caught up to him, he didn't stop either. I wasn't done, I panted, from the lack of oxygen at that altitude. I was. But I just wanted to ask you a few more things. He shrugged his shoulders. Later that day, I found him again and asked if he would speak with me some more. Can I pester you with a few more questions now? I said. He smiled in a manner that said, okay, so I started firing off some questions. So, one should only seek to love others and not receive love? Don't misunderstand. There is nothing wrong with receiving love, taking love. In fact, receiving unselfish love is wonderful. It is when you only conditionally give love, under the guise of love, in order to get something for yourself that is wrong. It is a serious problem in the world. I have heard it said that you must love yourself first. Only then can you give love to others. But this seems contradictory to the children's teachings. He stopped walking and looked at me with intensity. It was a look so intense that at one time, before I really knew him, it would actually scare me a bit inside. There is nothing wrong with loving yourself either, unless that is a rationalization for actually being selfish, which is often the case. But you can really unselfishly love yourself. In fact, it is unavoidable if you love unselfishly at all. Because when you love unselfishly, you love all, and that includes yourself. And when you love unselfishly, you feel so good about yourself that you can't avoid loving yourself. But you don't ever really feel good about yourself when you love selfishly. Yourself might feel good temporarily, but you don't feel good about yourself. And if you don't feel good about yourself, how could you really be loving yourself? And how could a heart full of selfishness even find room for truly loving itself simultaneously? So it is backwards, what they say about loving yourself first. Now remember this. Instead of loving yourself first, unselfishly love others first, and you will truly love yourself automatically. You can't go wrong that way. The other is often just a clever trick of the selfish separate self to rationalize selfishness. Okay, I'll always remember that. Getting back to relationships, you touched upon the subject of what the signs were of selfishly or unselfishly loving in a relationship. But can you tell me more about that specifically? How you can tell if you are loving selfishly in a relationship? I already taught you this earlier. I know. I was just hoping for greater clarification. I'm sorry if I'm being dense. Better? Okay. And it is a very important thing to learn. One of the ways you can identify selfish love is, as I mentioned earlier, when you do a self-examination of your motives, and you find that your actions or feelings of love are because you are getting something, some kind of energy or attention from the loved one. This is what most people call love. Here is a common phrase that makes a good example. Perhaps this will help clarify. I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. You've heard that, yes? I nodded. That kind of love is conditional. It will only give if it is getting what it wants. That's what most relationships are built upon, that mutual agreement to give to each other's selves. Here's another one you must have heard before. It must be give and take. No, it must be give and give in order to work. Because if it's give and take, what happens when both feel that they should be taking at the same time and think the other should be giving? And that happens all the time. Relationships like that don't last. They are disintegrating and full of turmoil. For each self wants and fears, and when it doesn't get what it wants or is confronted with its fears and dislikes, problems start. When people enter relationships like that, everything is perfume and roses for a while, honeymoon period phenomenon, because the selves are each getting so much energy, so much self-gratification. But after a while, one of the partners in the relationships always falls short and doesn't give as much as the other wants. Then, negativity begins to snowball in a familiar cycle. One partner feels slighted and says or does something to hurt the other. Then the other reciprocates and hurts back. This negativity builds strength and momentum each time it goes back and forth. The relationship is damaged. Sometimes the damage can't ever be repaired, and comes just another coffin nail in the relationship's eventual death. It can be no other way in selfishly based relationships. Universal law is in effect here. Only in unselfish love is peace found, both for the giver and the receiver. Of course, the biggest warning sign of selfish love is jealousy. Selfish love is also possessive, and thus must spawn the most terrible and destructive emotion that exists, jealousy. Selfish love can only bring negativity and destruction in the end. How many have hurt or even killed those they supposedly love because they loved him or her so much that they couldn't stand to lose them? What yak dung! What a grand deception! Such is pure selfishness, not true love. If you have love for someone or something, unselfish love, you want the object of your love to be free and happy, regardless of the consequences to you. When your love is selfishly based, you care more about what you want and really care very little about the loved one, if you care at all. I didn't really know what else to ask him at this point. He answered all of my questions thoroughly, and new questions about relationships wouldn't crop up until the future, the next time I had to deal with my most serious relationship issues, which I will discuss later in the book. But this seems like the appropriate chapter to reveal more of the children's general teachings about the emotions and virtues that are integrally related to true love. So, let's travel to another time, years later, when I was lecturing to a group of novices in the great meditation hall about the children's teachings on the practical qualities of unselfish love. The real-world qualities of unselfish love. Unselfish love is the most important way of being that there is. Why? Said novice Yusef. With the exception of people who are hardened in darkness, virtually everyone can agree that kindness, compassion, caring, giving, creation are good things. Thus, these things are far more significant than any belief, any teaching, any wisdom, any knowledge. Even more important than the ancient texts and the children's teachings? Far more important. If you don't understand that, you don't even really understand the teachings, because that's what they're all about. These qualities are virtues that are the result of unselfish love and oneness with God, are they not? Yes? That was a rhetorical question, Yusef. For a moment I wondered if I was such a pain as a novice. We call these traits the basic spiritual virtues or qualities, and they are the natural result of true spiritual growth. If these qualities are not the outcome of your growth, then the growth is not really spiritual. Why? Again with the why. Because true spiritual growth moves you away from the world of separateness and selfishness and towards universal consciousness and oneness. Such a shift in consciousness can only result in caring for all, for you realize that all beings are you, all the universal spirit. For instance, you may see people who profess to be holy or cosmic, who meditate or pray, or people who have great metaphysical knowledge, or developed abilities, and so-called strengths through various programs or doctrines. Whatever they're getting out of it, if it's not making them more caring and compassionate, it is not spiritual growth. Compassion. Compassion is the greatest of all these virtues that are a part of unselfish love. Compassion means feeling for others, caring about others. A person without compassion is truly empty and cold. There is such a thing as imbalanced compassion, however. If compassion clouds the mind and alone dictates your actions, you can make many mistakes and end up harming yourself and the ones you care about. But this is a problem all too few people have. It is better to have too much compassion than not enough. But like all emotions, it should not overwhelm you and take control of you. Emotions should be feelers, sensors, that we are open to, fully aware of, and get information from, but that we are sufficiently transcendent of, so they do not control us. Unconditional love. Elder Peniel, is unselfish love the same as unconditional love? Very good question, Yusuf. I guess you could say unselfish love is a type of unconditional love. But if you interpret the words unconditional love literally, it means giving to or being supportive of someone, regardless of their actions, no matter what. If we use that as the definition of unconditional love, then what we call unselfish love is different in an important way. Unselfish love does not mean giving the loved one anything they want or supporting any and all actions. Unconditional love like that could be harmful to the ones you love. Unselfishly loving someone does mean that you will always care for them, always still care about what is best for them, regardless of what the loved one may do or choose. But there can be conditions set on interaction or support. What conditions should be set? It's not a matter of fixed rule. Everyone is different. Everyone has different needs. There are some things that are the same, but each individual does have different things that should be allowed or not allowed. So how do you know where to draw the line and what to give or not give? Loving someone unselfishly automatically makes you give to the loved one what their whole being needs. But it does not just feed their wants and desires. In fact, unselfish love may actually require denying a loved one's desire. But whatever is required for the person, whether giving and or denying, both are done regardless of its consequences on you, even if it means the person will hate you or fight you. You must do what is best for them. For example, consider the raising of children. Let's look at the application of unselfish love versus unconditional love and normal or selfish love in that scenario. There are times when you should not give a child what it wants, because it's not in their best interest. They may want something that could harm themselves, or harm someone or something else. But when unselfish love is not present, a child is likely to be given into when they persist, or throw an ego tantrum. But if you give in, even if there is no physical harm that results, it may make them what is commonly called spoiled. The term spoiled is merely a euphemism for a person's selfishness being so consistently given into and well fed that the self grows in power and wants more and expects more. In the case of children, they become what people call little monsters, and in the case of adults, they become what's called selfish jerks or bitches. Child or adult, a person whose selfishness is overindulged becomes quite difficult to deal with, and they lack civility and love for others, and you don't want to be the one who feeds such a thing, do you? No. That was a rhetorical question again, Yusuf. Does anyone else want to ask anything? Maya, I feel you have a question. Yes. Okay. I understand what you want to know. You've seen people who are often mean to their children. Sometimes they get very abusive. And that isn't what we mean by not giving in to them. Quite the opposite. You see, there is a common flip side to the coin of indulging someone's self. Since it is being done because the person's giving in is actually selfish, the other aspect of their selfishness also comes out. Sometimes, rather than giving in to a child, the same parent, who is not unselfishly loving, will instead treat the child with anger or even violence, which also further creates bad programming, bad behavior, and a monster. But why do they give in sometimes and not others? Various selfish traits, laziness, not loving enough to deal with negativity, etc. How many times have you seen a parent tell a child not to do something, and the child ignores them? The child ignores them because they know they can get away with it. Then the parent says no again. Still no results. Eventually the parent gets angry and either yells or strikes the child. What does that teach the child? Two things. One, it may be worth the gamble to see how far it can get away with something, because they know that the parent doesn't really mean what they say or back up their threats very often. And two, when the parent finally loses it, all the child knows is that they are being attacked, hated, and that bigger and stronger is better, and might makes right. All very bad lessons. On the other hand, an unselfishly loving parent will give loving instructions one time, and then demonstrate that with absolute regularity. Then, if they are not listened to, a loving discipline will occur. Sure, it takes more work and ironclad consistency, and you must sometimes do things that are unpleasant, both for yourself and for the child, such as taking away something that the child likes, or grounding them, or isolating them like sending them to their room, but always with love and kindness. Only such true loving action yields good results, and it yields remarkable results. The child will eventually not test its limits and ends up a happier, more loving being itself. This applies to relationships also. If you tolerate harmful or unpleasant behavior in a mate or a friend, either because of unconditional love or because your relationship is based on selfish motives, then you have a mess. And when you finally lose it and get negative and angry, it will create even more of a mess. But if you love unselfishly, you may even be able to help someone overcome their problems by both not tolerating bad behavior and giving loving, positive direction at the same time. I want to know what love is. I need you to show me. By now, the importance of unselfish love should be clear. But how does one really get to know what unselfish love is? We gave little examples earlier in the chapter about how some parents may have tasted a bit of the joy of unselfish love by anonymously giving to their children under the guise of gifts from Santa Claus. But even that taste was virtually nothing compared to the full experience of being totally, unselfishly loving, and the mix of peace of mind, sadness, and bliss that accompany it. Nor does it give us the taste of what it's like to be totally, unselfishly loved. In my later years, I discussed it with Zayin. Father, I don't know if you remember, but a year or so ago we discussed how one could know when they are selfishly or unselfishly loving someone. No, I don't remember, but I know you always speak the truth now, Peniel. What do you need? We covered a great deal about my selfishly loving, but not enough about unselfishly loving. I'm seeing changes in the way I deal with people as I love them more, And I also see the results of it. It can make such a difference. I have moments of unselfishly loving. And when I think about my personal experiences with the adept teachers here, I can imagine what a difference it will make in me if I become fully, unselfishly loving all the time. And you have told me that my time to leave will be coming soon. Obviously, I can't or shouldn't leave until I achieve that kind of unselfish love as a permanent state. So could you tell me more of what I need to know? Peniel, you will know all you need to know when your time has come. But of course I will answer your question. You know I look forward to our talks a great deal these days. As I do also, I love you more than I ever thought possible. We embraced for a moment, and then he spoke. The fact is, most people have never experienced pure, unselfish love, either giving it or receiving it. And how can anyone expect to even know what it is unless someone first loves them unselfishly? How would you describe colors to a person born blind or born colorblind? And how could you describe colors to someone else if you were born blind yourself and have never experienced color yourself? That would be even more difficult, and unselfish love is something that you can give unselfish blind people. That will describe it to them even more. It will show it to them, even though they have never experienced it themselves. In the future, after you are enlightened and have left here, when you meet people, it will almost always be the first time that they have ever met someone who really loves them, and you will often be a stranger to them. It will always be a blessing for them, even though they may not know it or know what's going on. It will be more powerful than your words, even though it will be in harmony with both your words and your actions. Because the experience of being unselfishly loved involves feeling something from someone, something subtle possibly, but something that you've never felt before. It also involves an inner spiritual kindling, a knowing, and actually seeing an example of the way someone lives and acts when they are universally conscious. Most people can't love unselfishly until they experience being loved unselfishly first. Too few have experienced the impact of being in the presence of a being who is fully unselfishly loving, but it is not by accident. It is because they have not been willing to experience it within themselves. They have not been willing to surrender to the universal spirit within them. When a person is willing to begin to change, to start to unselfishly love, then they will meet someone who loves them unselfishly. You will be meeting people like that all the time. People who are ready to change. People who have prayed or desperately hoped for some kind of answers or guidance for their lives. This you will bring without even trying or doing anything. Experiencing being loved by a totally unselfishly loving being is a great blessing, and this can spark the flame of unselfish love within the loved one, if they are open to change and to begin giving themselves. Unselfish love can spread this way. Author's note. Often, the first time one ever experiences being unselfishly loved is from one's personal true teacher. I'll discuss this more in a later chapter. But know that there will be great pain, because often those who you have completely opened your great heart to and made yourself vulnerable to through your love will hurt you. You already know, though, that such is the price of being a loving servant of the universal spirit. Then there are those who are spiritually hardened, or hiding from the light within, or even the brothers of the darkness. Depending on the severity of their opposition to the light, they will find your presence, your unselfish love, mildly disturbing, to extremely annoying, to a reason for rage, anger, hatred, and even violence and murder. You have seen it in the history of all our kin. Look what they did to the Grand Master, even though he planned it himself to spread the word of unselfish love and oneness with God. The other side of the coin. Earlier, you read that unselfish love and oneness were like two sides of a coin. Unselfish love is what a person does who knows they are one with God, the universal spirit. Unselfish love is the way of the flow of the universe, the way of the one. Unselfish love is the way of being in harmony with the universe, and an instrument for doing the will of the universal spirit. Universal love is both the end result of breaking our illusion of separateness and a way of attaining oneness. Unselfish love makes living a meditation. While you can find a detailed, concise list of the children's specific meditation techniques in Part 2 of this book, the concepts presented here are not just philosophy and stale dogma. They are, in a grand sense, also a technique, a way of living a special lifestyle, a universal lifestyle. Living life with an attitude of unselfish love is the technique of a universal lifestyle, and that is the essence within all the children's teachings. In one of my discussions with Zayin, he taught me this concept. One day, I was asking him about meditation and telling him I had so many duties I couldn't find time for my meditations. Of course, this really wasn't true. I was just being lazy. This is what he had to say to me. Unselfish love is the way of eternal everyday life meditations. It spans 24 hours a day, every day. Even your sleeping hours, your dreams, can be a meditation. I would define meditation here as being in the middle, perfectly balanced between the infinite and the finite. Manifesting the universal spirit, infinite, in the physical plane, finite. Meditation has often been considered a process of stilling the mind, but that is not the whole of it. Just the stilling of the mind can be relaxation, concentration, or discipline. These build your mind into a strong tool for the universal spirit, but are prerequisite to true meditation. The mind must be still for you to be a channel for spirit. But just the stilling of the mind, the relieving of tensions, etc., without the merging with the highest ideal you can conceive of, and applying, manifesting that, is for what? Of what good is any belief or growth method if it doesn't make life better, more kind, more beautiful? If your life doesn't radiate these things, then your life is but that of a sun that doesn't shine. The opportunity to grow, to give, and to unselfishly love is here every moment. Your whole life can be a constant meditation, meditation in action, a flow in harmony with universal flow. This is the song of life, the art of living. It is always, forever, now. For when one truly attains universal consciousness, everything else, every thought, every action, reflects it. It is a change from a life of wanting and fearing to a life of giving and security. To give you somewhat of an example of aspects of your life that can radiate anew, here is a very incomplete list of some of the everyday type of activities that can be a part of your constant meditation, your universal lifestyle. When approached in this way, even the mundane becomes a beautiful, flowing art form, including relationships with others, walking, running, movement, sex, driving, sweeping, washing dishes. Author's note. I've had some great dishwashing meditations. I'll tell you about them later. Breathing, opening, closing a door, waiting, doing things quickly but without hurrying, eating, chopping wood, writing, drawing, singing, composing, talking, digging, planting, anything and everything. So tell me, you have no time for meditation? Again, the essence of it all is to manifest the universal spirit in and through the physical vehicle, body, mind, self, by living a life of unselfish love. You're going to hear this same thing over and over again, and in many ways throughout these pages. It's not mere redundancy. It's being repeated to make the impression that everything always comes back to the same thing. And that one concept is all you need to realize in order for everything to fall into place. It is the master key to any door. The phantom attacks by night. In the years after I left the monastery, I traveled a great deal. During that time, I visited monasteries and spiritual communities of many different religions and paths. One spiritual community I stayed with for a few weeks had created a unique way for its members to experience unselfish love via giving to other members. They called it the phantom, and here's how it works. Let's say someone makes a cake or a coat or whatever to give to someone else in the community. Rather than giving it to them outright or wrapped with a little card letting them know who the gift is from, they leave it sneakily in the middle of the night with a note saying it is from the phantom. Their method ensures the anonymity of the giver. Thus, the only personal gain the giver gets is the joy of doing something nice for someone else, the joy of giving, the joy of unselfishly loving. This ensures that the giving is being done for the right reasons, unselfishly, and is thus not feeding the selfish separate self. You might want to try some phantom giving yourself. It's not only good for you, it's fun. Chapter 9. The Separate Self. We have already covered part of these teachings in other chapters. But even though some of the writing in this chapter is just a bit redundant, it offers a great deal more clarification and other information from the ancient Atlantean teachings. In hot water? It was in my second year, and I had developed a deep bond with my teacher, Zayin. But at this point in my evolution and learning, he could still really shake me up and throw me for a loop when he wanted to, which he did from time to time as part of the process of helping me change and grow. Obviously, he decided I needed to consider changing something about myself, or understanding something I was not really getting, because one day he stopped me on the way to the hot pool and said quite sternly and loudly in his intense mode, "Have you ever asked this about your life or the world in general? Why so much suffering and destruction?" I was just on my way. He had that intense fire in his eyes. I hesitated for a moment, trying to think of what to say or do. Then I decided I better just simply answer his question. I struggled past being stunned for a moment, so I could actually think about his question before I answered. We just stood there while he waited for my answer. Then it finally came out after a few seconds that seemed like years. "Yes, of course, Father, I have. I've asked it often, even when I was young, and it always perplexed me. Then one day I guess I sort of gave up, thinking there was nothing I could do about it anyway." Accurately identifying the problem is the first step towards finding any solution. So what's the problem? The separate self is the problem. When he walked off, as if he'd just only said, "Top of the morning to you," as we passed in the streets of Dublin, well, later that day, I stalked him. I waited until he was on the way to the pool himself, and then, when the time was perfect, I pounced. I stopped him and asked, "So," I said, "what's the problem?" "No problem." "No, you said the separate self is the problem." "Yes." "Well, you just can't say that to me and leave it at that." "Yes, I can." "But why did you do that? Why did you say it that way and just leave me hanging? Is there a problem with me?" "Certainly." "Well, okay, you think you got me. Tag, you're it. Now, we'll get you back. First go to the library. Ask Gabriel for the English translation book from the tablets of Emilius. Pick it up in front of him, hold it in your hand, and let it fall open where it may. Read the pages it falls open to. Then, do the same with the book of Zoroaster and Zend. Then, the same with the translations of the book of the scrolls of the Old Testament of the Bible. Then, the same with the scrolls of the Koran and unaltered New Testament. Read the pages each falls to. Then, also read the following texts." He went on to give me my reading list for what looked like a month. Here are some of the most significant highlights. The spiritual self came to be as the one divided within itself. Created then were infinite multiplicities of the one, still one with the one. Consciousness of oneness remained. Separate self-consciousness came to be as the separate self moved deeper into the matter of earth. Vibration fell into density and fragmentation, with polarization into male and female. The opposites repelled. The positive lost receptivity. The receptive turned from the positive. Polarity misdirected. The flow waned, chaotic. Severed in consciousness from the one, the way was lost. The separate self only has life in separation. Separation is an illusion that the separate self works to maintain. The monkey mind serves to keep away the stillness that reveals the light of truth and oneness in the illusion of separateness. From the one, Ahura Mazda, the separate self believes and behaves in ways that are not harmonious in the flow of the one. Such disharmony causes suffering, both for the separate self and others. The separate self, turned within instead of without, began the way of take instead of give. Thus, the birth of selfishness. Then came to be the selfish separate self, the master of selfishness, the pawn of darkness. Selfishness, the root of all evil, all ignorance, all wrongs, all pain and suffering. Greed, hate, jealousy, envy, vanity, and lust. Call thee each by thy true name, selfishness. Theft, brutality, war, and famine exist not without selfishness. The selfish separate self is a creature of our own design. It disdains love, shuns the light, fears the truth. The selfish separate self lives against the one. It lives a lie. It survives only in illusion. It lives only to serve itself and its masters, the darkness and the lords of darkness. It relishes ignorance. With its self-centered gaze, it is blind. The selfish separate self is insane, terrified of death, yet it often accelerates its demise, wants to avoid suffering, yet it often creates it, wants to fulfill its every desire, yet it often prevents their attainment. It suffocates itself with its own blind taking, and destroys its own source of life. The selfish separate self controls the mind and twists the truth. It can avoid God by searching for God. It can avoid love by looking for love. Your selfish separate self is the most terrible demon you will ever see. Transcend its grip, and you will be free. Your selfish separate self will frighten you when you look it in the eye. Greet it with true love, and it will die. From the ashes of its grave, like the sun it will rise, born anew, separate no longer, to serve your true self. And the will of the One, as a servant, its proper place, it finds peace and happiness. Thus do the great enemies become allies, as one. The one becomes two, the two becomes three, the two beget four, and begins the more. Within and without, torn between and against, mirrors on all sides, split inside and out, again and again, thus to the ignorant self. To be whole again, to be home again, only the weary learn. Only the bleeding heart returns. To be whole with the One again is the great goal, the great mountain we can climb with our will. For those who take power over their selfish separate self will return and be wholly one. The holy ones use the power of love, sacrifice their selfish separate self, and make to give. Thusly, did they find their spiritual self again. Thusly do they forever walk with the peace of the whole, and in their holiness are a blessing to all. Okay, I'm going to take a little break here and put on some music, and I'll see you in just a few minutes.